And welcome everybody. You're at our deep dive on the new Indivisible guide, a practical guide to defeating MAGA. We're going to be here for probably about an hour and 15 minutes tonight, so settle in. We'll give you everything that we have at least right now, and there's going to be a lot to come after this call. But really quick, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Nora. I work on Indivisible's training team, and I'm going to be kind of guiding us through the call tonight, facilitating as best I can. So I'm going to pass it to Indivisible co-leader Ezra in just a moment here, but first I just want to give you the agenda and a little bit of housekeeping. So like I said, Ezra is going to be our first speaker. We'll get a strategy overview from Mary. We'll get a deep dive into what it looks like to actually do the fight against MAGA from Megan. And then Andrew will give us that side of it for Dems. And then thanks so much to a couple of our organizing staff who have joined us tonight, Becca, Krista, and Sarah Reesky, who are going to tell us about some case studies from the ground that probably a lot of y'all might be familiar with if you're part of the Indivisible groups that did some of that work. We'll do a little bit of recapping and some Q&A, and we will close out the night. A couple things I want you to know first about our space, though. We do have captions available. They should be visible at the bottom of your screen. If you're not seeing that, there might be a button that says CC or control bar to turn them on, but since this is a webinar format, they should be visible for everybody. And speaking of it being webinar format, we're gathering questions along the way. The chat is your best function for that. So you can throw thoughts, comments, questions for sure, all in the chat. And we've got a couple staff who will be responding along the way, as well as gathering questions. We're such a big group, we won't be able to get to everything, but the most common ones that are showing up and the ones that feel most crucial, we're definitely going to have time for in some Q&A. A lot of folks are probably wondering, what about slides and recording? You will get those as long as you opted into receiving email replies. You'll get those probably tomorrow morning. You're welcome to forward and pass them along. A quick note, since I mentioned slides, for anybody who's dialed in by phone tonight, most of the things that are showing up on the screen are also being said out loud, so you're not missing a whole lot if you can't see what's on the screen right now for any reason. And then a couple other smaller things, or maybe not smaller things, but just more about like how we're managing this call. We're trying a new structure for one of these really big calls where we're offering some kind of reflective prompts along the way. It's not like a full training where we can workshop everything in a ton of discussion, but because some of our content tonight is complex or deep or might just be new for some of us to be thinking about, we wanted to offer some built-in moments to just reflect and think about how this applies to your work, whether you're in an Indivisible group, whether you're new, wherever that might show up. If those are useful to you, take advantage. If they're not, great moment to just get up, stretch, maybe have a sip of water, check your phone, whatever you need to do. And then kind of on that note, people are going to be emphasizing this a lot tonight, but this call is kind of just the beginning. Maybe it's not just the beginning because we've already released the new Indivisible guide. A lot of you have probably already read it. Or maybe you haven't seen it at all. And regardless, there's just like the actual execution and all of this work that's still to come. So what we wanted to offer tonight was something kind of in the middle where we're digging in on some of the stickier or more nuanced parts of our strategy, while also giving some really concrete examples for just how to get it done and what it can look like. But there's going to be a lot more to come. So we couldn't cover all of it in, hour and 15 minutes or so, but we're trying to dig in, come together on some of it, start dreaming and imagining, and we've got a whole year of work ahead of us. So I think that's it from me. I'm going to take down this screen share real quick. And Carly, if you can bring up Ezra and take me down, let's have Ezra, our co-leader, kick off the core part of this call now.
Great, Nora, am I here? Can y'all hear me? Can y'all see me? Maybe. Yes. Okay. People can see and hear me. The magic of technology. Thanks. Look, I am so fired up to be here with y'all. I mean, in general, I love being here for national calls, but this national call is like the most indivisible-y of the indivisible calls that we do, because look, from the very beginning, going back to 2016, you all know this. Indivisible has always been about the practical side of politics. That very first guide, the Indivisible, the practical guide to resisting the Trump agenda. And we all come to this work from different geographies. You see in the chat how far wide and spread everybody is in this movement. We have different geographic realities, different local political realities. But we, at Indivisible, we don't just come here because of our shared affinity for democracy, although we have that. We don't just come here because we are reasonably scared of the anti-democratic extremist wackadoodles who are in control of the House right now, although we do believe that. We are here because we believe that our own actions individually, as local groups, as a nationally coordinated movement, can actually change political reality. We believe that we have power and that together we can figure out how to efficiently and effectively use it. And we've been doing that for 6 years now. We've been doing that for a long time. When I had more hair, when I had less noticeable bags under my eyes. We've been notching wins by acknowledging, building, and wielding this power. And these are wins that surprise the armchair political prognosticators out there that upended conventional wisdom. In 2017 and 2018, we saved the ACA and built a blue wave. That wasn't supposed to happen. Nobody said that was going to happen. People said that was impossible. In 2019, 2020, we impeached the bastard, and then we made him the first one-term president in generation. That wasn't supposed to happen. We did it. In 2021 and 2022, we won 2 impossible Georgia Senate runoff seats. We passed the largest climate bill in American history, and we averted a supposedly inevitable red wave. We did the impossible, and we prevented the inevitable. Hashtag Indivisible. Feel free to tweet. So as I look out over in the future, over the next 2 years, we have, in my eyes, we have the ability to do the same thing. We have the ability to do the impossible and prevent the inevitable. And my North Star is this. Look, 1, I want to limit the harm done by these ridiculous, weak MAGA wackadoodles who are now in the House. I want to rebuild the Democratic trifecta, meaning we retake the House, we hold the Senate, we defeat Trump or DeSantis or whatever MAGA is offered up for the presidential. And then using that power that we have then built, we reform the filibuster, codify Roe, and pass democracy reform. That's where we're headed over the next 2 years. These are big, big goals. These are ambitious goals. And as I look at some of the, again, political prognosticating out there, the same folks who are out there questioning whether all this is possible are the folks who were saying that saving the ACA was impossible. They were saying that taking the House was impossible. They were saying that defeating Trump wasn't possible, or that preventing this red wave was impossible. Those are the folks on the sidelines who are saying, probably can't win, don't try. I don't buy it. I don't think the 500 plus leaders on the call here from all across the country buy it. And the good news is we don't have to buy it because we are not professional political pundits. That's not what we do. Indivisibles, all of us, we are not in the business of making political predictions. We're in the business of making history. And to make history, you got to have a plan. We know that. That's why we had a plan for 2017, 2018. We had a different plan for 2019, 2020. We had a different plan for 21, 22. Now we are into the 2023, 2024 cycle. And look, what do we got? We got a new plan. And I'm excited about it. This is what we're going to dig into today. This guide is practical. It's not practical about resisting the Trump agenda. It's practical about defeating MAGA. That's what we're doing. That's what we're here to discuss tonight, to dive into the details. And we are here to say that this future that we all want to see of building the Democratic trifecta, codifying Roe, passing structural changes to our democracy, all that is in reach. And we can take individual steps, all of us, regardless of if we're in red states or blue states or purple states or anywhere in between or any mix. We have things to do individually that make it more likely that we achieve that future together. So over the next 2 years, look, there are going to be a lot of ups and downs. We're going to have some wins. We're going to have some losses. But what we believe is that if we all do our part, if we all organize our people in our own communities and we figure out a way to grab our piece of this plan, then together we're going to win. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it off to Nora and then back to Mary, and we're going to get into the details. Let's do this.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you so much. So folks, I just want to offer you one more quick kind of screen share moment. So as Ezra has already said, and for the rest of the call, we're going to be digging into the kind of stuff that's just like worth more talking through than what's in this guide. But right now, if you don't know what this whole guide thing is about, or you just want another reference point, I just wanted to give a real quick concrete orientation. Right now, the link to the new guide, the PDF of the new guide, is going out in the chat. I'm also sharing it on the screen. And don't worry, I'm not going to page you through like all of these pages and all these little words, but I just wanted folks to have a second to see it, to know what we're talking about tonight when we're referring to the guide. I just had the title page up. Now I'm showing the table of contents. A lot of what we covered tonight is going to be reflected here, but it's also, like I said, doing its best to kind of expand on and give some more concrete examples of what this can look like. But just so you know, it's here. It'll be sent out in the email again tomorrow. Forward it to your group members, forward it to people who you just talk about this kind of stuff with and are interested in learning more together. If you're not part of an Indivisible group, there's a lot of great stuff in it. All right, just real quick, concrete orientation there. And let me go ahead and pass it off to Mary to give us a little bit more of a deep dive on the strategy. Mary, you with us?
I am. Can you hear me, Nora? Wonderful.
Sure.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Ezra. And hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you tonight. Okay, so as Nora said, there's a lot in the new guide. And if you haven't already, I really hope that you'll take some time to read through the whole thing. But tonight, in the sort of strategy section, I want to spend some time digging in on what I see as some of the hardest and stickiest parts of the strategy, which is the issue of issue selection or campaign selection. Our goal with this part of the conversation tonight and moving forward with you all is to have a shared vocabulary that we can use to wrestle with these concepts together. So it's not that there's a right or a wrong answer. There's a framework that we're all going to be experimenting with and implementing over the next couple of years. In the guide, the framework is framed a little differently based on whether you're represented by a Republican or by a Democrat. But regardless, the underlying question that we're trying to answer is, which specific campaigns or issues help us build, help us pull more people into our movement, increase our political power? Like, that's the key question that we're trying to answer. And regardless of whether you're represented by a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're organizing in a red place or a deep blue one, this framework can help you figure out the most effective, most impactful work, both for long-term power building and to help us win back the trifecta. So first, we're going to talk about Republicans. And what it looks like if you're represented by a Republican elected official or working in a pretty red place. Remember, one of the key ideas in this is that the framework we're talking about scales for all levels of government, whether you're thinking locally or at the state level or at the federal level. Before we jump in, we've got to clarify our goal. In red places, for the most part, our primary goal is not changing the behavior of MAGA Republican elected officials. I'll say it again because it's like a little bit of a brain switch for a lot of us. Our top goal is not changing elected officials' behavior in red places. Instead, our goal is peeling away the voters that have supported them in the past. It's sort of a steely-eyed assessment that their extremism has made their coalition fragile, that we have the opportunity to peel folks away or also attract folks that never landed in any political coalition in the first place. So again, the real target is the people, not the electeds. That doesn't mean that we won't sometimes use tactics that target the electeds in order to make our point or get media coverage or something like that. But our real North Star focus is the people who ultimately have to decide who it is that they are going to vote for. Okay, so again, the way we're going to get those people is by campaigning and talking about stuff that lives in the super sweet spot of fitting these three criteria. Number one, the MAGA Republican position is wildly unpopular. Like, they are out of touch with the broader American public. Number two, our solution is wildly popular. The thing that we're pushing for is something that a strong majority of folks across political parties want or support. And number three, it's salient, meaning the topic is already part of the national or state or local, remember the scales conversation. I want to pause for a second and say that's a word we're going to use because it's specific and it's what we mean. When we say salient, what we mean is that it's something that is already circulating in the general public. It's on people's minds. Abortion was salient during the 2022 election cycle. Gun violence is salient after a mass shooting. A bill is often salient right before the big vote on it. The point is that you're not having to do the work of bringing it into people's awareness because it's already there. Okay, so again, theirs is unpopular, ours is popular, and it's salient, are the three criteria we're looking for. So let's quickly walk through some concrete examples to kind of get a feel for what this looks like in the walking about in the real world. I'm going to do these quickly. Obviously, if you're like meeting with your groups and really digging in, you do like a more detailed version, but I'm going to take a couple of minutes to run through kind of quickly. Okay, so the first one is a national abortion ban. This is a great one. To be clear, a national abortion ban is terrible, but in terms of scoring on these criteria, it scores really well. So restricting abortion, very unpopular. Protecting abortion access, very popular and hugely salient for people. But to complicate this and give you a sense of how this works, let's compare it to, for example, an actual bill that the House considered that would prohibit DC from using taxpayer dollars to support abortion access. How does that one score? So their position is still unpopular. Ours is still quite popular, but compared to the national ban, it's less salient. because it doesn't directly affect that many folks outside of DC. Okay, different example. Folks might have seen the recent dust up, no pun intended, about gas stoves and the health effects from indoor air pollution that they can cause. This one, not that great for us on the score. And I want to be so clear, I'm not talking about the policy effects of this. Like on policy, should we move away from gas stoves as part of a bigger shift towards electrification and clean energy? Absolutely. Should we tackle preventable childhood asthma? For sure. But is that a campaign topic that helps bring new people into our coalition? No, not really right now. Instead, it's one that triggers people's big government telling us what to do fears, rather than helping pull them toward us as the side that's truly fighting to protect personal freedoms. So I'm going to take a step and acknowledge this is really hard. Obviously, all of us just want to focus on the issues that matter the most to us and our families and our communities. And the piece of strategic kind of insight that we're bringing forward and wanting to wrestle with you all inside of this framework is that unless we build a broad enough coalition to prevent a MAGA takeover in 2024, we won't see any progress on any of our priorities at the federal level. So we have to meet people where they're at. So again, this is not some hard or fast rule about what you can or can't or should or shouldn't work on. It's a framework to help you and us and all of us together judge the most effective and impactful among a few different options available to you. Okay, so that's like the that's the Republican side. Now let's talk about the Democratic side, what it looks like if you're represented by a Democrat or organizing in a bluer place. And again, our core campaigning question that we're asking is what helps us build? More concretely, what helps us build a durable, multiracial majority coalition capable of defeating fascism and building and rebuilding a functioning democracy for all of us? That is a mouthful. So our shorthand is what helps us build. And the thing about building is that unfortunately for us, it requires consistency. When you're on the attack, when we're going after MAGA extremism, we can be much more chaotic and opportunistic. But when you're trying to lock in the bones of a coalition at the identity level, you just got to hit the same notes over and over and over again. That's how you lock it in. And so the thing that we're looking for is a core story that is accessible enough that it invites people to join us, robust enough that it tells them the whole story, but simple enough that people can get their arms around it. So when we're thinking about all of those things, we think that our core story that we want to repeat over and over and over again until it's imprinted on the back of our eyelids is that our brand has three themes: being pro-democracy, delivering for the economic well-being of everyday people, and promoting personal freedoms. Pro-democracy, economic well-being of everyday people, and personal freedoms. And I think coming out of this last year in particular, and the midterms in which Roe and election denialism and MAGA extremism in general were so prominent, such key themes, I'm guessing that the pro-democracy and personal freedoms part of that are really intuitive to the folks on this call. But I want to take just a quick second to talk about why a concern for everyday people's economic well-being is a critical part of the core story as well. There's a couple of reasons for it. There's more than a couple, but I'll say a couple right now. The first is that when we ask ourselves why we weren't able to win more transformative change during the last trifecta, the answer is that a small set, and honestly, a very small set of corporate bought Democrats blocked it. And so making sure that we're telling a sharper, clearer story about who we are, what we're fighting for, and we're crystal clear about what we need to do the next time that we have a trifecta is part of the focus here. But the second reason is because we know that this piece, the everyday people's economic well-being, is a focus that can help us attract and then durably hold on to folks who aren't currently part of any political coalition. And we need those folks to win. I want to be clear that this core story that I'm talking about, again, pro-democracy, personal freedoms, and economic well-being of everyday people, is not about moderating our progressive values. Please hear me say this is not about moderating our progressive values. It is about being disciplined and strategic about the things we focus on so that we can make the best use of our precious time and energy. It's sort of the democratic mirror to the issue selection I was talking about for Republicans. So in red places, the things are their position's unpopular, ours is popular, and it's salient. That's the issue selection criteria. On the Democratic side, we're looking at being pro-democracy, concern for everyday people's economic well-being, and protecting personal freedoms as the issue selection criteria that helps us build the most accessible on-ramps to build political power and pull more people in. The final thing that I'll say on the Democratic side is that we're all going to have to push Democrats to be active fighters rather than just sitting it out on the sidelines. My colleague Andrew is going to talk about this more later, but we just saw a great example of Democrats doing what we want to see more of this Congress during the fight over the speakership. There's another universe in which many of them just sort of quietly sat out the whole thing. But instead, they showed up, they contested the vote, they pointed out the ways in which Republicans were caving to the most extreme parts of their caucus. They talked about the incredible harm that MAGA Republicans were promising to core social programs like Social Security and Medicare and more. That is the kind of active storytelling that we need to see and that we'll likely need to push them for. And with that, I will hand it back over to Nora.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Really appreciate that. So y'all, I don't know about you all, whenever a lot of, my beloved colleagues, as well as a lot of Indivisible group leaders speak, I'm like, whoa, that was deep. I need to process. So we wanted to offer a little moment for that. So like I said at the beginning, there's just going to be a couple of touch points over the course of this call where even just for like a minute or 90 seconds, wanted to invite folks to take a second to just digest a little bit with a couple questions. If this helps you, jot it down in a notes app or on a piece of paper, wherever you'd like. If it's not relevant or doesn't feel useful, you can stand up and stretch, take a little mental break. So out of everything that Mary just covered, that kind of strategy overview, my first invitation is just to consider what's kind of sticking most in your mind. Like if you had to just pick one thing that Mary just said that you want to hold on to, what would it be? And then kind of another side of that coin, what questions do you have coming out of that? Like what would you still need answered in order to start feeling like you could put this into practice? And if you were like particularly struck by that kind of like, I'm actually mainly inviting this right now for the first issue Venn diagram that Mary kind of talked about. Maybe take a second to ask yourself, especially for our folks in red occupied territory, are there any local issues that come to mind that kind of fit that framework of their position is unpopular, ours is popular, and it's salient? This is something I also certainly find relevant as a person in blue territory when it comes to those corporate Dems and those folks who are fairly democratic. So take a second with it. And Carly, if you want to go ahead and bring Megan on in just a second here, we will transition to a little bit of deeper information about how we're fighting MAGA. Megan, you with us?
I am. Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Megan Hatcher-Mays. I'm the Director of Democracy Policy at Indivisible. I'm filling in for my colleague, Danny Negretti, whose flight was delayed. So sorry, you're stuck with me and don't get to hear from Danny, but I shall do my best to fill in. Danny's our political director, by the way. So normally when Danny's in charge of stuff, that means we're running like an electoral campaign. But there's no federal election this year. So what we're going to be focusing on is like expanding our scope a little bit to include the broader fight against MAGA, which I think we've already started to allude to on this call. So as you all know, the effort to take the fight to MAGA was something we really leaned into in the 2022 midterms, which feels like 1,000 years ago. The idea was that if we could somehow make the midterms about MAGA extremism, we could win, even though, as Ezra pointed out, off-year midterms usually go badly for the party that's in power. And the results of the elections really showed that our concept worked. We lost control of the House, but we had a lot of success, state level races. We gained seats in the Senate, all very exciting. And that's really down to all of the hard work that you all did. So this year, we're keeping up the heat by ensuring that accountability doesn't just come around every 2, 4, 6 years in November. We're going to be spending a lot of time making sure that Republicans are paying a political price for their unpopular agenda. And that should be true no matter where you live. So Mary talked a little bit about, it's not that we're ignoring MAGA Republicans. It's just that your advocacy is going to look very different, whether you're focused on, on one thing or another. So when it comes to Republicans, it's all about dirtying them up a little bit. So here's what that means. First, whether you're in a deep red district or a pinkish purple district where Republican kind of just barely squeaked by on some sort of, I don't know, maybe more moderate agenda, you will have something to do to hold your member accountable. This also means that National is going to be partnering with some groups at the state and local levels for some high priority fights against MAGA outside of the federal government. So we'll be looking for opportunities to resource fights like those and shine a light on the way that Republican officials at every level are trying to reshape our communities and our democracy when they think voters aren't looking. So state and local work, I know, has often been the heart of Indivisible groups, work, and that can be complex to balance with the national work. So we're excited to really put some energy behind those more local fights. So I'll also mention, speaking of Republicans who squeaked by, there are 18 Republicans who won November in districts that Biden actually won in 2020. Those folks are particularly susceptible to accountability and will be recipients of this work. So we're going to be working with groups in those districts to really kind of go deep on accountability in those areas. So let's get a little bit more concrete. What exactly are we talking about doing? A lot of this work is stuff that many of you already know how to do. Probably when you're sleeping, your body's doing the motions of advocacy at all times. For years, the difference is that you are not, like Mary said, you are not trying to change your Republican member of Congress's mind. They are lost. They're in the MAGA woods. For the most part, they're a lost cause. Actually, I would say for every part, they're a lost cause. And the truth is they can't get anything done in a divided government anyway. So they're not really your audience. Like Mary said, our North Star focus is on the people that we can kind of pull over to our side. So that's your friends, your neighbors, other folks in your communities. That's your audience. Those are the folks that we want to pull into our coalition. So we've said a few times already, but it's always so nice to just say it. Republican ideas, very unpopular. So there are some good things to know about your Republican members of Congress. They are really scared of people knowing the truth about their unpopular ideas, which is why I think most of us saw this after the Dobbs decision came down that overturned abortion rights, overturned Roe v. Wade. No Republican wanted to be on the record about it, right? It's like, oh, it's about the states. It's about the states. That's just a tricky way of them saying, of course I support it. Now I just don't want to admit that I do. So they're going to try to distract from what they're doing in Congress, and we can't let them get away with that. They don't have answers to questions about their unpopular ideas. The absolute last thing they want is to be on the record explaining their unpopular positions on the policy. They are cowards who will sometimes literally run away from having to answer for their unpopular ideas or for having to answer for unpopular members of their own party. Last year, I hope somebody from Indivisible May Day is on, but we saw this last year when Indivisible May Day found a place. Dr. Oz was going to be, they pulled out their cell phone cameras, asked him to explain his position on abortion, and he could not escape fast enough. And that clip went viral. So that's the sort of thing that we should be trying to replicate a little bit. So what does that mean for us? First, we have to get these folks on the record. So many of them don't do town halls anymore for this exact reason, but every single one of them eventually will find themselves out in the community over every congressional recess, whether that's a parade or something else. They really can't help themselves, and they really do need to put themselves out in front of the voters at some point. They can't hide forever. So you can ask for their public schedule. You can set up Google News alerts for your member of Congress, sign up for their newsletters and alerts from their offices. You can follow their social media channels, sign up for email alerts from other local groups in your community or organizations where you think they might be, like local chambers of commerce, always a good place to start. So it might take some time, but you will find somewhere that they're going to be that is public or public enough. Your goal there is to show up, try to get a question, try to ask a question, and then get their response or non-response on camera. When they take a vote, call their office and ask for an explanation of their position, why they voted that way. You can send an email to their office asking for a response to your message, and share these things that you get. Whatever they send back to you, you should share on social media, share with your Facebook groups, your Facebook friends, and let constituents in your community know that their responses are insufficient, they're extreme, they're voting for super unpopular positions, and you can do all that in letters to the editor as well. Getting these folks on the record is one tool that serves to put public attention on their unpopular ideas and tie them to controversies, or to the controversies of their colleagues. So like, I don't know, I'm sure, like, I think the whole Beltway press attention has been wrapped on George Santos now. Lots of other Republicans are getting questions about him. Like, that's kind of how these things sort of work. The way we put public attention on them is through earned media and social media. So sometimes that might be a protest. Becca's going to talk a little bit about the January 6th anniversary rally or vigil in Pennsylvania that happened a couple weeks ago that got a lot of media attention. But we also know that in 2023, the press doesn't cover protests quite as much as they used to. So it's going to require a little bit more creativity and maybe visuals to get their attention. So that's where stuff like Laughtivism comes in. I love talking about this whole Fetterman-Oz race, so I'm really glad I have another example to share. But many of you probably heard about some groups in Pennsylvania walking around for most of last summer dressed as broccoli to kind of draw attention to that ridiculous video that Dr. Oz made in Wegner's, it's not a real place, buying crudité for his wife, just to remind voters of how out of touch Dr. is. God, I'm so sorry. How out of touch Dr. Oz was and continues to be. And those our broccolis made the New York Times, so good for them. Again, George Santos, I think groups in his district are talking about collecting short letters from kids about why it's bad to lie and doing a mass delivery to his office over recess. Like, this is the kind of thing where folks can get really creative about really exposing some of the bad behavior of their bad members. It doesn't always have to be funny. It can just be visual or newsworthy. Krista, my colleague, is going to talk about that a little bit more in a bit with a really powerful example of a die-in action that happened in Florida. Those can be really intense, but they make a real important, very impactful statement in your communities. So in our follow-up materials, our team is going to share some really easy to use templates for advising these types of events to press before they happen and sending photos out after they happen to try to maximize coverage. But however it plays out exactly, the goal of these tactics is to make the Republican brand toxic. This is because it is. There's no really such thing as like a moderate sort of normal Republican anymore. This is really about the longevity of your work. It's not one and done. We have to repeat the story over and over again to really build our narrative and build up our coalition. So we make the brand toxic by showing up at every moment and opportunity that we can and shine a light on MAGA Republicans' extremism and their unpopular opinions. So I did want to just give a heads up. A lot of this work is going to be reactive. It'll be maybe sometimes be hard to plan for because a lot of it is rooted in the news cycle. Like, you might not know in advance that your senator candidate or your member of Congress is going to say something out of touch about crudité. You might not have a broccoli costume at the ready. I do, of course, because you never know, but you might not. So a lot of this stuff is going to be reactive. We do know Republicans in the House are going to be pushing really awful messaging bills to fire up their base. And we can't let them get away with it just because we're confident that the Senate and the President Biden are going to be blocking that legislation from becoming law. But there's also going to be opportunities to be proactive at picking fights, and I'm really excited to keep in touch with you all about that and those opportunities. So we can't exactly give you a game plan for the whole year, but we wanted to know how we're going to be thinking through the strategy and what the tactical response will look like. I really do hope it means that you can reuse your veggie costumes, because I think that was a really great investment. So that's all from me for now. I'm going to turn it back over to Nora.
Thanks so much, Megan. Really appreciate it. And thank you for the reminder on investing in veggie costume, which I haven't done yet, so I don't even know if I really count as an Indivisible right now. But more importantly, just another quick check-in moment. So this one, of course, is especially for our folks in red occupied territory, or folks being represented by Republicans. Just a couple quick things to sit back and ask yourself. Out of everything, there were a couple slides there that Megan just had that were lists of like, try this, try this. You might want to see those again, but if there's anything that you just saw that you're familiar with or that you can imagine doing, now would be a great time to just note that for yourself. Or is anything Megan mentioned that kind of sparked like, hey, I could see us trying that out. And then actually related to that, has anything come up that you want to discuss soon with your group members? This is especially for folks here tonight who are part of active Indivisible groups. If there's something that has been covered so far, especially from the anti-MAGA strategy and execution just now, that you want to make sure to bring to a meeting or a conversation sometime soon, just go ahead and give yourself a second to note that. And as with everything tonight, we know a lot of this could afford and will get, as it deserves, much more conversation and planning time in all kinds of other spaces. But this is our kind of simultaneous, like 10-foot and 10,000-foot view tonight for now. Okay, so Carly, if you can go ahead and bring on Andrew, let's go ahead and switch over to talking about, so we talked about fighting MAGA. How are we going to get the Dems to fight with us? Andrew, are you here with us?
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Sure can. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Nora. Hi, folks. I'm Andrew O'Neill. I'm Legislative Director here at Indivisible. I lead our policy department, and I'm really excited this year to be leading our new campaign focused on Democrats. So let's talk about what that's going to look like. As Mary mentioned, we need Democrats to be able to tell a compelling story about their party and who they are. And that story is that they're fighting for three things. They're fighting for our democracy, fighting for everyday people's economic well-being, and they're fighting for our personal freedoms. And importantly, they're willing to fight against entrenched powers that benefit from the status quo, that don't want that progress. That's primarily the ultra wealthy and big corporations and their enablers in Congress. But what do we want Democrats to actually do to demonstrate this story? First, I'm going to cover the three main roles that we want Democrats to fill in this moment. And then we'll talk a bit about the work that Indivisible groups can be doing on the ground to push them in that direction. So we explain in the guide that there are three main roles in a split Congress that we want Democrats to play. Number one, expose MAGA extremism. Number two, set the agenda. Number three, harm mitigation only when it's necessary. So we'll take these in turn. The nonsense that just happened with Kevin McCarthy's struggles, frankly, to become Speaker of the House in early January are a great example of role number one, exposing MAGA extremism. In some ways, Republicans made this pretty easy for Dems this time around. Republicans were in the driver's seat of a clown car, and so it was pretty easy for Democrats to point and laugh, but also draw attention to the real dangers of the extremism that was being empowered. But that's okay that it was easy. That's good news because we need Democrats to have these muscles loose and ready to go. As we move into future fights, we also need to make sure that they are filling role number two, setting the agenda. This means not just reacting to the bad things that Republicans are doing, but proactively shaping the conversation. So when Republicans are demanding cuts to programs like Social Security and Medicare in exchange for raising the debt ceiling in the name of fiscal responsibility, are Democrats letting the GOP frame that issue? Or are they themselves taking control of that narrative and making it about MAGA extremists' attempt to drive seniors into poverty, to destabilize the global economy, and talking about Democratic plans to strengthen Social Security and Medicare so seniors are more financially secure? Even in the minority, they have huge platforms to get this message across. And as Megan already talked about, we're going to get really creative together across both of these campaigns with how we get our members of Congress to use those platforms. I also want to touch briefly on role number three, which is harm mitigation. There will be certain moments this year, bills to fund the government or other must-pass legislation like that, where unfortunately there will need to be some compromise in order to get a bill through both chambers. It's vital in those moments that Democrats minimize any concessions that they make, and maximize their gains by, frankly, fighting like hell to the very last minute. And if Democrats have fulfilled the first two roles, exposing MAGA extremism and setting the agenda, harm mitigation becomes much easier because they will be fighting on more solid footing. Outside of these moments, harm mitigation actually won't be necessary. So even though Republicans might be able to pass a bill out of the House, it's almost certainly going to be dead on arrival in the Senate, and Biden would veto it or not sign it. So we don't need to worry about improving most of their proposals or reducing the damage they would cause, because we can simply block them and tell everybody the story of here's the litany of awful things the Republicans would do if they were fully in charge. So we have the three main roles that we want Democrats to play. But what should indivisible groups actually be doing to make their member of Congress follow that game plan? 3 steps again. First, make your expectations clear to your member of Congress. They got to know what you want. Be loud, get there early, remind them often that we want them to fight against MAGA extremism, to seize the microphones so we're not just hearing the BS from the GOP. And if you've already been doing some of the things that I know we all are very used to as indivisibles, if you've been calling their office, you've been emailing their office, we can try moving even further. You could set up a standing meeting with your group and staff from their district office to really build on this relationship. Then take these expectations, make them public as well. On social media, through letters to the editor, get them in your local newspapers, send them out in your group newsletters, share them in community meetings with other organizations that you work with locally, any public forum that you can find. Ideally, your member of Congress is going to, meet these expectations. They'll want to do that, and that will be cause for celebration. Of course, we know that some members of Congress are going to need more work, and that's why having those expectations public is really important when it comes time to do some accountability. My colleague Sarah Rieske will give a great example later about former Representative Kathleen Rice, who opposed some popular provisions in the Build Back Better Act that would lower prescription drug prices. And that didn't work out so well for Kathleen Rice, but I'll let Rieske tell you more about that later. So set expectations. Next, we want to jump on opportunities to push your member of Congress to be a fighter. Let's take the same debt ceiling example that I've talked about before. Republicans have committed to taking it hostage to demand unpopular cuts to programs like Social Security and Medicare. In the past, frankly, many Democrats would have responded to similar threats by just ceding ground and agreeing that with Republicans that cuts were needed. The debt, it's such a big problem. I guess, yeah, I'll vote for some of these Republican priorities, even though they will harm real people. That's obviously not what we need. What we need is what we've seen actually from many Democrats in the last couple of weeks who have stood up and said, absolutely not to cuts to Social Security and Medicare. They've decided that this is a fight worth having rather than a fight that they should run away from. And they're exactly correct. Protecting these programs is the popular position, and the GOP hostage taking is really toxic. So we've set our expectations. We're jumping on opportunities to push our member of Congress to be a fighter. And last, you want to close that loop. You want to debrief with your member of Congress. We're asking them to not just be simply voting the right way, but speaking up, showing out. And so thank them when they do that, and let them know when they're not meeting those expectations. So we've got the 3 roles that Democrats need to fill. We've got a bunch of tactics to push them in that direction. But some of you might be thinking, how does this apply to my specific member of Congress? And a huge benefit of the strategy that we're working with this year is it applies to every Democratic elected, whether you're in a D+40 district or your representative just flipped a really tightly contested seat. So let's talk about how that works. If you're a member of Congress held on in a district that Trump won, it can feel like maybe you shouldn't push them too hard. They're really just trying to stay in office. They just need support. But here's my pitch to you. What we're asking Democrats to do is very popular. We're asking them to pick smart fights on issues that matter deeply to voters. That's our democracy, our personal freedoms, and our economic well-being. And we're asking to create reasons to celebrate them and build more support. So it's not about, trashing them unless, they really deserve it. But it's mostly about making clear, reasonable, and enthusiastic demands with all of the tactics we've already discussed. For other folks, you may have a a solid progressive member of Congress in a solid blue district. You really like them. They share your views. They vote for the bills that you want. And it can feel like they're covered. I don't really need to focus there. I'm not going to work on them. Sometimes your member of Congress truly is an all-star, and I think we all could name a few of those. And much of our job is building that relationship with them and giving them shine for their good work. But many of us have Democrats who seem like they're in this camp, but actually there's a lot more that they could be doing with their platforms. For anyone who's recruited volunteers for a campaign to do door knocking before, think about it like moving members of Congress up the ladder of engagement. So you meet them where they're at and you want to move them one rung higher, sign up for the next shift. Hey, can you lead this volunteer shift, et cetera. So for members, this could be inviting them to speak at a rally or to walk a picket line or introduce a bill taking on corporate greed in front of a bad corporate actor's offices. The main thing for Democrats in safe blue seats or Democrats fighting for every last vote is that you're demanding they use their presence and platform to make populist fights more visible. You're asking them to run towards the conflict instead of away from it, because conflict is what drives attention. So whether it's conflict with predatory corporations or corrupt actors or the Republican Party, the only way anybody pays attention is if we're using that conflict. Some of this might feel a little bit different or new, but I do invite you all to dive into this with us. We're going to be doing some fun experimentation together. We're building something new, but I think a lot of Democrats want to build something new as well. And so it's up to us to shape that into a party that can win majorities, that builds our movement by bringing more people to our side, and is prepared to deliver the type of change we need to protect our democracy and create an inclusive economy. And with that, thank you. And I'll hand it back to Nora.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. So we're going to do one more kind of reflection moment on what Andrew just covered on our democratic strategy. And of course, this is going to be especially relevant for those of you all in anywhere from light bluish purple to super dark blue places. My invitation is for you to kind of check and be like, well, I wrote this on the slide, what's been the story with your Democratic congressperson? But what I mean by that is like, what's the concept that you have of them and what their fight is? Like, I know for me, my congressperson is Delia Ramirez. I mean, she just got elected, but like, definitely I'm kind of in that camp that Andrew just said of like, she's great, she's doing fine, there's nothing I need to fight with her. So just check in, whether it's that, or maybe a little bit more like, ooh, this person is barely holding on, I just need to support them. What's kind of the story that you have for your Democratic congressperson? And whatever that is, how could some of the tactics and options that Andrew just described either strengthen or shift that story? And that might be something it still feels like it could use a lot more conversation and workshopping and support and ideas. And those are things that we'll all be working on together this year. But just a moment to see if anything comes to mind right away. So, all right. And I think I'm going to go ahead and take these slides down. And Carly, if you could go ahead and get me ready. So folks, the next section that we're going to do and kind of the remainder of our content tonight prior to some Q&A is a little bit more storytelling. So that was a lot of, we had slides, we had strategy, we had examples, but there's like some actual really cool work that's happened on the ground already that exemplifies what this year is going to feel like. And some of these stories y'all might have been involved in. We've got them from a couple different parts of the country, but it's worth learning from those stories once again. So Becca, are you with me?
Hello. How are you?
Welcome. You want to introduce yourself to everybody? Say hello.
Sure. Thanks, Nora. I'm so happy to be here. I am my name is Becca Litt, first of all, and I'm the organizing manager from Pennsylvania and Delaware. And it's so nice to see so many of my group leaders in the chat. I'm really happy that you all are here. Yeah,
I've been loving seeing those names as well. So awesome. So Becca, as you just mentioned, you're our organizer for Pennsylvania. For Delaware, it's Albert as well, but we're going to talk about Pennsylvania right now. And folks, we kind of chose Pennsylvania because it's one of those classic swing states. The narrative can shift if people consider it a little bit more right or left, depending on the year, but it's kind of one of those more battlegroundy feeling or kind of swing places. So that's the first example we're going to start with. So Becca, tell us about it. I know a lot of work happened in Pennsylvania last year, but I'm wondering if you can just paint the scene or tell the story for us a little bit about your groups in Pennsylvania's 10th district, what they were dealing with their member of Congress, and what they started to try to do about it.
Yeah, so because I'm talking about our anti-MAGA work, I first want to mention that I would be remiss if I did not mention that so many of my groups in Pennsylvania did some really great stuff with our anti-MAGA work in 2022. Megan alluded to the broccoli and the following Dr. Oz, and there's so much more that we haven't even mentioned. I could really go on for the rest of this call about all of the different things that my groups have done, but for the sake of time, I'm going to highlight the groups in Pennsylvania 10. And so this is the Pennsylvania 10th District Network, and that's a coalition of indivisible groups and allies across the district. So, okay, so just a little bit about Pennsylvania 10, first of all. So it's in the middle of the state. It includes Harrisburg, which is the capital of the state, so sometimes it gets a little more attention because of that. And then their member of Congress is Scott Perry. You all can say boo every time I say his name. You might have heard it. Thanks. Maybe you might have heard of him, but because he's been in the news a lot recently. If not, here's a short resume of his, right? So he's a MAGA Republican, he's an insurrectionist, he's a proud Freedom Caucus member who was directly involved with January 6th, and he even asked for a pardon from Trump. So all around, stand-up guy. Just kidding, of course. And so the groups in Pennsylvania 10 were not having any of it. They started last summer. They began a series of tactics that not only was incredibly successful in making the MAGA Republicans more unpopular with the general public by making their positions seem extreme and out of touch and thereby making that MAGA brand toxic, but they were also really impactful for recruitment.
Okay, and I know, especially that last piece as well, the recruitment piece is going to be exciting to folks, but tell us a little bit about it. Like, what were some of the tactics that they were working with?
Sure. So one of my favorite things that they did was they put wanted posters. I don't know if you've seen wanted posters in your neighborhoods. They put wanted posters all around the district. And so they had Scott Perry's face under a wanted sign. And then it said, "Perry is no patriot." That was the tagline. And they had a number to text to get involved. And over 100 people responded. And that really showed that they were able to peel away the voters who have supported Perry in the past. And they were also able to get people on our side who were not involved politically or were looking for a political home and didn't even know that was available to them to get more involved in their group. And then some of the other things, they had weekly rallies. And at one of the rallies, one of my favorite ones, it was in Hershey, and they handed out Hershey kisses that said "Kiss off, Perry." They filed ethics complaint to the House Ethics Committee that got some press attention. They had a billboard defaming Perry. And one of my favorite things about this was it was right near his office. So his staff had to drive by this anti-Perry sign every single day. And the list goes on, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So you were just covering some of the tactics, things they did. How did they decide just like what to focus on or what to try to draw attention to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they really just followed Mary's framework that Mary went over earlier on the call. I said Mary's framework because if she owns it, but Indivisible's framework that Mary talked about. So, the idea that MAGA Republican positions are unpopular and that Democrat positions are popular, right? So in this case, most Americans did not support the January 6th insurrection, and folks were really worried about our democracy, understandably. And Pennsylvania 10 groups use this to their advantage by reminding people over and over and over again that Perry was connected to the insurrection with the phone being seized by the FBI and not showing up when he was subpoenaed. And they just kept reminding people of all of these things that he did or didn't do. And that was something that the majority of people did not support. And then in contrast, they were also reminding folks of something that most people do support, that our side is all about, which is basically a stable, functioning democracy. And then the other thing that was really smart that they did was they used January 6th because it was a topic that was salient. So the topic was already part of the national conversation. So for better or worse, the topic of a functioning democracy is still a salient issue. It's still something that people are really talking about in the national conversation this year. And, Perry has been in the news with the speaker vote and the concessions that the Freedom Caucus has forced McCarthy to take, et cetera. So groups in Pennsylvania 10 took advantage of that moment just a few weeks ago, this past January 6th at the Harrisburg Capitol steps. And they got a ton of local and national press. I could not even believe it. It was just a really, really, really great to see. And partly they got so much press because they've been building this narrative since last summer. And that's what we really want to stress on this call, is building the narrative is really important, like building off of one thing to another thing to another thing. And that was all with the goal of peeling people away from their side and winning more people over to our side.
Yeah, so I wonder if you can say a little bit more about that last point, because I know that's something that I like find myself thinking about with this like narrative work sometimes or whatever. And like, I don't mean to give away that Perry, is still in office. So it's not like they got him out of office. Just like, how are your groups understanding what the goal of this work was, or kind of how they assess some sense of win with it?
Yeah. So I want to be really clear that it's sort of been mentioned that we're not trying to change Republicans' minds. I think Mary and Megan both mentioned that. And that's true with Scott Perry as well, right? The groups were not trying to get Scott Perry to do the right thing. He's not going to wake up. They knew he wasn't going to wake up one day and be like, maybe I'll be a reasonable elected official who won't undermine our democracy. They're not naive. They know that's not going to happen. What they were trying to do was they were trying to target voters in the 10th district, some of whom probably voted for Perry before and were considering voting for him in the future, so they were helping to peel away those voters to vote for the Democrat. And that's exactly what our strategy will be in 2023, right? We can't change the balance of power in Congress until 2024. It's just not going to happen. But what we can do is we can win by slowly bringing more voters towards our side. And some of that will also have a really cool added bonus of adding more members to our groups, which I know my Indivisible groups are always looking for, and I'm sure many of you are also. And as you mentioned, Perry did not win in 2022, unfortunately, but he did win by a lot less than what was predicted. And I also want to point out that this also improved our statewide margins, which helped us to flip that Senate seat so that we now have John Fetterman as our senator. Woohoo! So that's really great. And then one last thing that I just wanted to mention about why I feel like their work was impactful, even though Scott Perry still won, was that they were able to really shape the narrative of the MAGA brand. So it wasn't just about Scott Perry, but the entire MAGA brand being toxic, which helped hold vulnerable Democratic seats, and it helped to flip MAGA GOP seats in other districts. So it was really like an added benefit to other districts around the country. And they're going to do that again towards 2024. And trust me, they're already planning something for next week. I'm meeting with them about setting a calendar for the congressional recesses. So the groups in Pennsylvania 10 are not going to stop holding Perry accountable anytime soon, really until he's out of office for good. So you'll be hearing a lot about them for the next 2 years.
I hope we do. Thank you so much, Becca. I really appreciate hearing about that. Folks, as we're bringing on our next organizer, storyteller, I just want to give a quick flag. We're at about 9:00 Eastern, 6:00 Pacific. We originally planned this call for about an hour and 15 minutes. I'm just sensing where we're at right now. It's probably going to go a little bit longer than that, maybe stretching to a little bit more like an hour and 30, because we want to have time to address some of the really crucial and significant questions folks have brought up. So hope you'll stay with us. If you can't totally understand it, you'll get that recording tomorrow morning. So, all right, Krista, give me that unmute. Can we hear you? Can we see you? Confirmation. Hello. Yay.
I'm Krista Lipinski. Happy to be here. I am the organizer for Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. And if I seem nervous, it's because I am. This is my first national call somehow. But I'm really happy to be here and to talk about some of the important work that my groups do.
Thanks, Krista. And folks, if you just want to give a little snaps or woo out loud to your computer screen, shout out to being on a national call. There were like 1,700 people registered for this. So that can feel like a big deal,
Yeah.
So we just were with Becca, a little bit more of a purplish place. Now we're being teleported to Florida, a deeper red place, which I know you're going to mention in a second. But so I've heard a lot about the work in your turf in general, but we wanted to talk tonight about an action around trans rights that happened towards the end of 2022. So just like I asked Becca, can you kind of paint the scene for us? What was happening? What did your group start to think about it?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to preface this with Florida is a hard state. Shout out to all my groups here. Shout out to all my groups in all of my states. It can feel exhausting continuing to do this work where we feel unsupported by our elected officials, and especially in Florida where we are, it's backed by DeSantis, and now we have a supermajority in the state ledge. But
We're going with the
yeah. So everyone in a super red state, like I feel you. But yeah, so specifically about this instance, let's talk about the trans rights work that my brand new group in Miami decided to take on. Indivisible Miami in South Florida decided that when they heard about back in August, the Florida Board of Medicine had moved forward with rulemaking process that would prohibit doctors from providing gender affirming care for Florida youth. And obviously this is terrifying, right? And it's something that we see like happening across this country. So they decided to take action.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what kind of was the plan they started putting together.
Yeah, so this brand new group, led by Kat Dusterhouse, did what we Indivisibles do usually. We take action, right? They knew that in previous Board of Medicine meetings, there's a trend of either speakers being cut off, or people not allowed to speak at all. And so they decided that they were going to collect stories from trans youth, adults and parents, caregivers, medical professionals, who could speak to why this care is so important. And they decided that, they wanted to provide training to these people so that they could help them make sure that these stories are like written in a way that's the most impactful that they could be, right? And so all these stories were then entered on the record ahead of the meeting to the Board of Medicine. And yeah, so the board finally met, and the meeting happened, and it quickly became very evident that the process went as they were worried it would, where people were not allowed to speak. A lot of the people that were able to speak were not even Floridians, and there's dozens of trans Floridians, parents of trans youth from Florida in support of gender affirming care who were denied any chance to speak. So
Well, I'm really hoping that the story doesn't end there, because that would be discouraging. And I'm hoping that Kat and the Indivisible Miami team had a plan. They did something else. Tell us.
of course, very savvy group. They were prepared, right? So at this point, when they became aware that like that's the way that the meeting was leaning, they all decided to exit into the lobby of the building where the meeting was taking place, and they staged a die-in. They all laid down, and they had covered themselves with the trans flag, and they had cut out cardboard headstones that read things like HRT taken away, denied care, killed by state apathy. And obviously it's a very powerful picture. These are very powerful photos. And so
Yeah, I'm bringing it up right now just for anybody who's maybe dialed in by phone, or just to describe what's on the screen a little bit more. This is, I just pulled up an article from the Orlando Sentinel. The headline says Florida panel backs ban on gender affirming care for minors at contentious meeting. But then right under that is a photograph of exactly what Krista just described. You can see folks kind of in this convention center looking space, lying down on the ground with trans flags over their bodies, and signs in the shape of tombstones that have some of the phrases that Krista was just describing.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Sometimes I look at this and folks, I forget my notes because I'm just thinking about the work that was done. So I'm going to take it down so we can just go back to focusing on storytelling a little bit here. But Krista, with that in mind, and just what you've told us so far, actually kind of as that headline said, I know that unfortunately the Florida board did ultimately vote to ban gender affirming care. And kind of like I asked Becca, I'm just wondering, like, with that being the result, I'm wondering how for your groups and for you and for folks in Florida, people are understanding like the win of this kind of this action, or the impact, or how we make meaning of that when the result isn't actually what we wanted.
Right. Well, first of all, it's the right thing to do, right? Like first and foremost. We can't let these policies go unchallenged. So it's important for the country, the world to be aware of the policies that are like the DeSantis is pushing with his like MAGA extremism. We know he's making a run for presidency. We need to have all of this on the record. And by fighting this in this way, like we are taking control of the narrative, right? We know that in this way we're shaping the conversation because these policies are not popular. And in this way we also are able to acquire viral and visible media coverage that paints a negative picture of these mega Republicans and their agenda, which Mary said are wildly unpopular. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Krissa, and for any folks from Indivisible who might be on here, but just to see this kind of local example of it sounds like y'all were able to find that kind of Venn diagram place that exactly like you just described. And I would imagine that whether nationally or statewide or local, exactly what fits into that framework is going to vary place to place. But yeah, just cool to see an example of something where that really came together and where we can see the impact as a result of it, which I think just leads me to my last question, which is there any kind of final pieces about impact you want to mention before we move on to our next story here?
Yeah, it was also, this action also was a great way for this group in Miami to connect with local orgs, partner orgs, and also recruit membership because like I said, they're a brand new group. And so there's just a lot of positives.
Brand new group made this happen. Yeah, it's
a lot of positives there, so building the momentum.
Well, hey, thank you so much for sharing about that. Appreciate you being here, folks. Hope that story was inspiring. And last but not least, we want to welcome on Sarah Reesky. Sarah, you with us?
I sure am.
Okay, we can hear you, we can see you. Okay, Sarah, real quick, you want to just introduce yourself, anything you want people to know about what you do at Indivisible?
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Reesky from Central New York, and I am the New York State Organizing Manager for Indivisible.
Awesome. Thanks. So just like, well, and by the way, folks, obviously now we're going to, actually I shouldn't say obviously, we intentionally wanted to move to a place that's thought of as being deep blue, but has a lot more complexity to it than maybe we always give credit to. So going from purple to red to blue, with all the nuance those places tend to include, even though we generalize them. So just like I asked the other folks, Reesky, I'm wondering if you can start by kind of painting the picture for us. I've heard that New York Indivisibles, kind of got referenced earlier in the call, did some impactful work around Kathleen Rice and the issue of drug pricing that happened in the Build Back Better fight in 2021. Just tell us a little bit about what was happening. What were the stakes?
Yes, I'd love to. So once upon a time in the fall of 2021, the national vibe around Build Back Better was, yes, this was the moment we've been waiting for. We worked so hard in 2020 and we have this trifecta to deliver the good things that we deserve. Let's go. We're all about the climate, jobs, and justice and care for all. Let's get it done. You remember those vibes? Well, then there was a person named Kathleen Rice from Long Island who was on the committee that was in charge of writing the language to lower the prescription drug costs so that it would eventually get out of committee and go into the big package like a chapter in a book. And but at some point, our policy team got wind that she was not a hell yes like we were. She was kind of leaning towards a no. And they said, this is a moment for New York Indivisibles. Let's call Reesky.
Beautiful. I'm so glad they knew who they were going to call. What happened next? What did you and the New York groups do?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because in this moment, I knew absolutely that Indivisibles in New York were already fully committed in their true belief that they had constituent powers and can make a difference. And again, they're doing this not just for their communities or their own families or our state, but for everywhere. And so the first thing I did was I called Indivisible Nassau County and talked to group leader Skylar Bader and explained what was kind of going on in this magic moment of we need Kathleen Rice to move from a no to a hell yes. And so Skylar's superpower is data. And she said, Sarah, if I share a spreadsheet with you that has a list of our group member names and phone numbers, could you reach out to them about calling Kathleen Rice? Well, I work on an email to our full email list. I said, you got it. So for the next 4 hours, I'm texting furiously. Policy team got me a little video and some graphics and the right text to send out individual personalized text messages. And before you know it, I started getting some exclamation points and some thumbs ups and some dones. And oh, it just makes my heart, tingle with people hearing the call to action and doing it. And so while I'm busy doing that, our policy team was doing their inside game and keeping an ear to the ground about what was happening in Kathleen Rice's DC office, and chaos was a brewing, which is a very good sign that indivisibles are making their phone calls. So that was all really good news.
Yeah, and so it sounds like some impact was being made. You want to tell us, like, what did you start to see? How did this start working? What happened next?
Yeah, so of course the constituent pressure is kind of the kindling kind of sparking. And then of course there was a lot of negative media at both the local level in Long Island as well as the national one. And, she's not quite like other, Democrats who are maybe used to negative pressure in the media. So this was all kind of new for her. And eventually she flipped. She eventually helped vote a yes to get this package out of the committee. And then after another round of reminders in November, she did vote for the final Build Back Better package, which was great. And even though Build Back Better did not get signed into law by President Biden, it did become the baseline for the IRA language, and it was also important that she didn't block this very important flag to be planted, not only in history, but in this moment, that we overcame chaos and all this negativity to be for something, right? That climate, jobs, justice, care for all, Build Back Better package, saying we want this and we deserve it. So that was amazing in that moment.
Beautiful. Yeah. So in the spirit of what happened then in a previous fight connects to what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, can you just tell us how does the significance of a case study like this fit in with Indivisible strategy in 2023 in the new guide?
Right. Well, the main theme and the magic of all of this is just what Indivisible is, right? We do this inside outside game where we can really coordinate with the quick policy insight with the organized folks on the ground. And in this case with Kathleen Rice, it was rapid response. It was a surgical moment. And most importantly, the group was prepared. They had their data so they could be ready, because you just never know wherever you're joining this call from tonight. You never know if or how or when your member of Congress might get in the news, and you can use that to leverage to move them in the way that you want them to, because again, that Build Back Better, all the fights that are coming up this year, we need them to keep moving forward. And we are like a wall is how I think about it, because Indivisibles, we are never going backwards on so many things. And so if any of these Democrats think it's okay to kind of, backtrack a little bit, they meet us and we say, no, go this way. And so it also, really hits home on what Andrew was talking about earlier about, kind of no matter where your Democrat might be on the spectrum in the party, there's always going to be opportunities to show up and help remind them about going forward. And they need that push and they're going to need that support. So that's incredibly important. As we've been going through this new guide and as I've read it and being on the call tonight, I'm super grateful for everybody who put a single letter of it together, because I live in New York and New York is a fantastic place to implement the new Indivisible guide strategies. Many of you know that Democrats underperformed in the midterm here in New York. And we have 6 districts that were a woohoo for Biden, but are currently represented by, a Republican masquerading as a moderate. And so, this Indivisible guide is showing us that, there's a couple things we need to do. One of those is to lasso their feet and tie them to this toxic brand of being, a MAGA extremist. And our groups in these districts, these 6 Biden ones for sure are going to do that. But the other flip side of the coin that we also need to have going at the same time is pushing the rest of the New York congressional delegation to be loud, to be bold, to be confident in setting that agenda, as well as speaking about our 3, key points. And when they are all marching in beat with each other, when we have the new Democrats that are going to come up and organize and run in these Biden districts, they know exactly what beat to join in with. And so that is going to be super key from my perspective of how we're going to flip these districts next year and take back the House.
Awesome. Thank you for ending us on an inspiring note that was also nuanced and holding everything within it. So, okay, folks, you've heard some strategy, you've heard some stories, you've heard some ideas about tactics and execution. We want to bring everybody who spoke tonight back on. Carly, maybe if you want to put us in gallery view, that should probably help so we get out of the pin life. Hopefully we can see everybody's faces or as you're coming on and as you're ready. So that was a lot. I'm taking a personal breather. I didn't put up a reflection slide, but you know, just the reflection slide lives within us. We want to cover a couple of questions. Not everything, obviously, because we had hundreds of folks here tonight, but some of the things that kind of were the biggest. So one that I want to start with, I'm thinking Mary or Andrew, this might be a good fit for you all because you use the phrase personal freedoms a lot. And I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about like, how do we claim, first of all, what do you mean when you say personal freedoms, or what's, I know there's like a lot of intentionality in how that language is chosen, if you could just break that down a little bit. And then also when sometimes the right uses things that sound similar to that, like freedom to not wear masks or freedom to have my gun or something like that, how do we differentiate from that? So if you can just expand on that a little bit. I don't know who wants to take it between the two of you.
Sure. Yeah, I can take that. I think that there were two parts to that question. And one is basically like, what do we mean? And then the second part is how do we differentiate that from the like fake arguments about freedom from the right? But what do we mean by that? It's I think we can be pretty broad about it. But like concrete things to think of are, you know, the GOP wants to push forward a nationwide abortion ban, for example, right? And that is an attack on people's personal freedoms. And so standing up forcefully against that would be a good example here. In terms of how to differentiate this from the Republican rhetoric around freedom, I think it's important to note that their freedom is never inclusive. It doesn't actually mean for all of us. They're always talking about freedom for some subset of people. And typically that's, you know, white people, folks with privilege, et cetera. And they are typically not very concerned with the freedom of any marginalized group or folks with less power in society. So that I think is like the difference to have in the back of our head in terms of how to actually respond to them when they say, "Oh, I'm the candidate that cares about freedom." I think there are different ways, and it might depend on the issue. Yeah, that's what I have for now. We'll have more for you on that.
Yeah, that's great. That feels like a great start. And actually, you led to something that maybe I will go to you for next, Mary. We had a question that I really appreciate, which is how does racial justice fit into the frameworks we've talked about so far? And I think that person was asking both about the, you know, kind of blue priorities framework and that core story, as well as the anti-MAGA framework.
Yeah, I think it's really integral to all three of the sort of pillar parts of the core story that I was talking about. I mean, when we think about the ways in which MAGA Republicans and insurrectionists have tried to restrict and break our democracy, the disparate racial impacts of that are like at the forefront of part of what we're talking about. When we talk about some of the personal freedom issues, I think Risky dropped in the chat that like another one that's part of that is like freedom to marry who we love. And protections for queer folks to marry, for interracial couples to be married, right? Like that is also part of what we're talking about here, racial justice implications there as well. And then all across the entirety of the economic well-being of everyday people are really disparate impacts across race for the way that wealth is held and hoarded and denied to folks in this country. So I think if racial justice and racial equality are things that are important to you, those are really embedded and baked into any way that you operationalize the three kind of pillars that we're talking about of democracy, personal freedoms, and economic well-being. The thing that I want to call out as we're thinking about the sort of message discipline and the strategic discipline of the way that we're talking about this is that we need to have a relentless, so okay, let me just back up for 1 second and remind us, the whole focus here is how do we pull more people into our coalition to build our political power to defeat fascists and our opponents, right? Like that is our frame. And so we're thinking about how we build really accessible, easy on-ramps for people into our coalition. And so part of the way that we want to frame anytime that we're talking about any of these is to universalize them, to resist attempts for our opponents to divide and conquer us and separate us out. So when we talk about personal freedoms, we're not talking about freedoms just for marginalized people. We're talking about freedoms for all of us, including marginalized people, right? We want to universalize all of the things that we're talking about. So the many, the us, the we are fighting on one side together against the few and powerful of entrenched interests that we're fighting against. Does that make sense? So it's super woven into the 3 pillars. And we want to claim that as a broad we that includes everybody, rather than splitting into like categories of others that can be divided.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, it feels like there's probably still, as with everything tonight, so much more to talk about in all of that. But I appreciate you giving us a start and trying to hold it all together at the same time. There's one piece of something that you just said. I'm actually already, there was a lot there, so I'm already losing the exact thread I wanted to connect. But just like where we're telling the story and that kind of thing. Ezra, I'm wondering if we can go to you for a question that I know comes up for a lot of us who are on the left or liberals or Democrats or whatever, which is the feeling that our social media and sometimes even our news media can be a bit of an echo chamber that's only going out to other people who already agree with us. First of all, does that feel true, or are there ways to kind of complicate our understanding of that? But second of all, how to get out in front of the persuadables or Republicans, those people who are trying to peel away from MAGA support, whether they're neighbors, friends, community members, or strangers.
Gosh, it's such a major challenge that we face because we really live in 2 totally different realities in this country. Folks who watch Breitbart or Fox News or listen to Sinclair Broadcasting radio stations, they are living in one universe, and then everybody else is living in reality. So it's not just that we disagree on what to do, we disagree on actually what world we live in is. And I'm going to be honest, there are some folks who are just too far out of our reach. When I think of my grandparents-in-law, or when I think of some of my own family members who are down the Fox News rabbit hole, it does not matter if I correct them on some individual fact. They've got a whole other slew of facts that they'll back up and reconfirm their worldview. So we've got to be clear about who our target audience is. And our target audience is both getting energized, the folks who are already with us, and then as Mary and others keep hammering home, we're trying to build the coalition of pro-democracy Americans who want to reject this anti-democratic extremism. So most of those folks are not like us spending a Thursday night talking about how we save democracy. We'll be lucky if they are going to catch a snippet of news or watch something on CNN or hear something on their way into town or see a billboard or see something on the front page of their local paper. But the way that we're able to reach folks who are outside of our network, the whole theory here is we're able to get earned media as local community organizers who have been building up power and legitimacy in our own communities for years. So these events that we've been talking about today, these examples we've heard of getting into the local press, getting our message out, is a good way to reach those folks who aren't 100% in the MAGA camp, aren't already fully in our camp, but are interested in what's happening in the world. And Indivisible, because we are made up of local groups who are embedded in communities all across the country, we're particularly well positioned to get that kind of attention, because we're actually on the ground in these places. So I wouldn't, yes, we started at a big disadvantage. They have an incredible, on the other side, an incredible right-wing propaganda operation that both is effective for generating a lot of energy on their side and infecting the mainstream media. But we got people. We've got all of us. We have the ability to actually shine a light on the unpopular stuff that they're doing. And that's conflict. And you know what? Press likes conflict. Press likes to cover that. So we have a tool to use here, and it's up to us to use it.
Thanks. Appreciate that. All right. In the interest of time, we're just going to kind of keep it moving here. Mary, can we go back to you to talk a little bit about what's the story? Like, basically, are there any Republicans that we can change the behavior of? And I think there's a little bit of like the Biden 18 that's relevant in that. If you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and just dropping into the chat a list of the districts that went for Biden but then elected a Republican member of Congress in the midterms. So you'll hear them call it the Biden 18, the crossover districts, the Biden Republicans, like you'll hear different names for them. But that is one measure of some of the new members of Congress who are the very most vulnerable to being scared out of their minds by indivisibles. Is another short way of thinking about that. They're new members of Congress. They don't have a lot of experience, and they're in districts that they shouldn't have won, actually. Those districts went for Biden. They're vulnerable to being defeated. And so they're going to be the shakiest members of the caucus to break away. And so I really do want everyone to leave this webinar having held in mind that in general, when we're thinking about our orientation in red places in more Republican controlled territory, your goal is not to bash your head against the wall to get Ted Cruz to like change his mind about one of the wild things he believes. It's to peel away the coalition of voters that support him and folks like him. That is true. And that is like the core of how we're orienting. The one exception, the like asterisk on that, but that's going to be a big part of our work this year. And I know that we're super pumped to work with any of you that are in the districts that I just listed there, is that those folks in particular are the most vulnerable. They're the most shaky. And they're the ones that we can also get to peel away to like divide the MAGA caucus, to kind of highlight their extremism, how unpopular it is to have infighting, where rather than going up with their like top messaging to hit Dems, they're consumed with fighting each other. Like we have opportunities there in those 18 districts. There's probably some other folks that are vulnerable as well. So if you think that you have someone who is like definitely beatable next round and you're focused on that and beating up on them, like, and they're not on this list, please do not hear me telling you not to beat up on them. By all means, please carry on. But this is like one of the shorthand ways that we think about it, people who are shaky, where we think grassroots activists probably can have some measure of impact on their behavior.
Great, thank you. All right, folks, there was so much that we didn't get to in that, which is really right on brand with my very last slide for you all this evening, because we are going to end at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific in just one moment here. All of us are probably wondering at some level, what's next? Right now, that's not incredibly concrete. Like, I don't have a thing for you that's like, tomorrow at 6 p.m. we're taking action in this specific way, because a lot of this is still in the sort of like dreaming and imagining and brainstorming together structure, and a lot more to figure out together that we're all going to be part of. So what I do want to say for now, if you haven't already, there's a link going out in the chat to sign our 2023 pledge, just letting us know you're with us and that we should keep up with you. And that kind of connects to my next thing, which is like, if you're already getting our newsletters, if you're in touch with an organizer as part of your Indivisible group, if you're part of an Indivisible group, you're going to be hearing about the next pieces of it. It's going to look and feel a lot like what we covered tonight, but it's going to get more concrete and more specific and more actionable. And guess what? We know, excuse my language, we know some bullshit is going to go down sooner rather than later, and we're going to be responding to that, whatever it is. So there's proactive work as well, like folks have said, but it'll also be responsive in some ways to take advantage of the fights we can effectively pick. So that's all from me, folks. Really appreciate you all being here with us tonight. We will see you out there in this work and in this fight. Stay in touch. Our support team address is going out in the chat right now. If you have follow-up questions, stay abreast, get in touch, and we'll see you. We'll see you when we see you. Thanks, y'all. Good night.